Bola sat at the back of the classroom, scribbling words in her worn-out notebook. Her poetry was her escape, a place where her thoughts flowed freely without judgment. The world outside was loud and overwhelming, but on these pages, she was in control. School had become a blur of routine: wake up, go to class, keep her head down, and try not to be noticed. No one understood her, not even her parents, who dismissed her writings as mere distractions. But for Bola, each line was a lifeline, pulling her away from the dark corners of her mind. Today was different, though. As she sat in the quiet corner of the library, she overheard someone humming a tune, a melody so hauntingly beautiful that it stopped her pen in midair. She turned and saw Femi, the boy everyone knew as that singer. He was lost in his own world, eyes closed, fingers tapping on the table as if playing an invisible piano. Bola watched, captivated by the raw emotion in his voice. She felt something stir within her, a spark of recognition, like she had just found the missing verse to an unfinished poem. Femi leaned back against the school wall, his guitar resting beside him. Music was the only thing that made sense in his life, a language he spoke fluently when words failed him. But lately, even music seemed distant, slipping through his fingers like sand. His father had lost his job, and his mother's small trading business barely kept them afloat. Femi's dreams of making it as a singer felt like childish fantasies, impossible under the weight of financial strain and the constant pressure to focus on academics. The melodies he once loved now reminded him of all the things he couldn't have. As he plucked his guitar strings, his thoughts drifted to the poetry competition flyer pinned on the school notice board. It promised a cash prize, money that could help his family and maybe even fund his music. But poetry wasn't his thing. Femi sighed, glancing around the courtyard. That's when he noticed Bola, sitting alone, her eyes fixed on her notebook. He had seen her around, always quiet, always writing. He wondered what kind of words she hid behind those pages. It was during a school assembly that Bola and Femi's paths crossed again. The principal announced an upcoming talent showcase, encouraging students to participate and display their skills. Bola didn't pay much attention until she noticed Femi's reaction. His eyes lit up, and he leaned forward, clearly interested. But when he caught her staring, Bola quickly looked away, embarrassed to have been caught. Later that day, as she sat under the big tree by the school field, Femi approached her, guitar slung over his shoulder. "Hey, you're the poet, right?" Femi asked, trying to sound casual. Bola hesitated, unsure how to respond. No one had ever addressed her that way, she was usually just invisible. She nodded slowly, watching him with cautious eyes. "I've read some of your poems," Femi continued, pointing to a few that had been published in the school's literary magazine. "They are different. In a good way." Bola felt a strange warmth in her chest. She hadn't expected anyone to appreciate her work, let alone someone like Femi. It was the beginning of a conversation that neither of them realized would change their lives. Bola and Femi started meeting regularly under the tree, where they shared stories, dreams, and the struggles they faced at home. For the first time, Bola found someone who didn't dismiss her words or make her feel small. Femi's struggles with his family's financial situation mirrored her own silent battles with depression. She showed him her latest poem, one that captured her feelings of hopelessness and longing for something more. Femi read it silently, nodding as if each line resonated deeply with him. Femi, in turn, played a new song he had been working on, a haunting melody filled with pain and hope. Bola listened, moved by the raw emotion in his voice. "It's beautiful," she whispered, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. In that moment, they realized they weren't alone. Their friendship deepened, and they began to see how their art, though different, could be a powerful tool for healing. Together, they made a pact to help each other find their voices and, in the process, maybe find themselves too. Inspired by their growing bond, Femi suggested they collaborate for the school's talent showcase. "We could mix your poetry with my music," he proposed, his eyes gleaming with excitement. Bola hesitated, the thought of performing in front of a crowd terrifying her. She had always been content with her words remaining on paper, hidden from the world. But Femi's enthusiasm was contagious, and a part of her longed to step out of the shadows, even just once. They spent hours together after school, blending her poignant verses with his soulful melodies. It wasn't easy. Bola's natural shyness clashed with Femi's confidence, and they often disagreed on the direction of their piece. But each time, they found a compromise, driven by the desire to create something meaningful. As they rehearsed, Bola felt her fears slowly melting away, replaced by a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in a long time. Femi, too, found solace in their collaboration, his doubt about his talent easing with every session. Together, they were crafting something special, a performance that would speak to both their hearts. Rehearsals didn't always go smoothly. There were days when Bola's depression weighed her down, making it hard for her to focus. Femi, too, had his moments of frustration, especially when his voice cracked or his fingers fumbled on the guitar. But they pushed through, encouraging each other when one was down. Bola began to open up about her battles, revealing how her poems were born from the dark thoughts that often clouded her mind. Femi listened, offering silent support, knowing that sometimes, just being there was enough. Femi shared his own struggles, how he felt torn between his dreams of pursuing music and his family's expectations for him to excel academically. His father's job loss had placed an immense burden on his shoulders, and music often felt like a guilty pleasure rather than a viable future. But every time he and Bola worked on their performance, the weight seemed to lift, if only for a moment. Their collaboration became a safe space, a reprieve from the pressures that threatened to drown them. One afternoon, after a particularly intense rehearsal, Bola and Femi decided to take a break by the river that ran behind their school. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the water. Bola closed her eyes, feeling a sense of peace she hadn't felt in a long time. "You know, I've always felt lost," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "But when we're working together, it's like I'm found." Femi smiled, strumming a soft tune on his guitar. "Me too," he replied, and for the first time, they both allowed themselves to believe that maybe, just maybe, things would get better. They made a promise to each other that day to always fight for their dreams, no matter how hard it got. With each rehearsal, they grew closer, their bond solidifying into something that went beyond friendship. It was a connection that neither of them had ever experienced before, built on mutual respect, shared pain, and the healing power of art. For the first time, they saw a glimpse of hope on the horizon, and they were determined to chase it together. The day of the talent showcase arrived faster than they anticipated. Bola's heart raced as they waited backstage, listening to the applause for the previous performers. Femi squeezed her hand, offering a reassuring smile. "We've got this," he said, though his own nerves were just as frayed. They stepped onto the stage, the bright lights blinding them momentarily. Bola clutched her notebook, her palms sweaty as she looked out at the sea of faces. She felt a familiar wave of anxiety wash over her, but then she glanced at Femi, who nodded encouragingly. Femi began to play, his fingers moving deftly over the guitar strings, filling the auditorium with a soothing melody. Bola took a deep breath and started to recite her poem, her voice trembling at first but growing steadier with each word. The audience fell silent, captivated by the raw emotion woven into their performance. By the time they finished, the crowd erupted into applause, and for the first time, Bola felt seen. She looked at Femi, and they both grinned, knowing that this was just the beginning of something beautiful. The response to their performance was overwhelming. Teachers and students alike praised their unique blend of poetry and music, calling it the highlight of the showcase. Bola and Femi were on cloud nine, basking in the newfound attention. For Bola, it was a validation of her art, a confirmation that her words had power. For Femi, it was a reminder that his music could touch hearts, even when he doubted himself. But with their newfound recognition came new challenges. Rumors began to circulate about their close friendship, with some students speculating that there was more between them than just artistic collaboration. Bola's parents, who had attended the showcase reluctantly, were less than pleased. They saw her poetry as a distraction from her studies, and Femi's influence was seen as a negative one. But Bola was determined not to let their disapproval dampen her spirits. She and Femi continued to meet after school, refining their craft and dreaming of bigger stages. It was the start of a new chapter in their lives, one filled with promise and possibility. Despite the praise, not everyone was thrilled with Bola and Femi's partnership. Bola's parents became increasingly concerned, fearing that her focus on poetry would derail her academic success. They pressured her to spend more time studying and less time on what they called frivolous pursuits. Bola felt torn, trapped between her love for writing and her desire to make her parents proud. Meanwhile, Femi faced his own set of challenges. His father, already struggling with unemployment, saw Femi's musical ambitions as a waste of time. Femi's mother, though more understanding, also urged him to concentrate on his studies, hoping he could secure a scholarship to relieve their financial burden. The pressure mounted, and Femi found himself losing the joy he once felt when playing music. Bola noticed the change in him, and it worried her. They were both fighting battles that seemed impossible to win, but they held on to each other, finding solace in their shared struggle. Together, they vowed to keep pushing forward, even when the world seemed determined to hold them back. With the pressures from their families growing, Bola and Femi decided to channel their frustrations into their art. They spent more time together, not just writing and composing, but also experimenting with different forms of expression. One afternoon, Bola surprised Femi with a short rap verse she had written, inspired by the spoken word performances she had seen online. Femi was impressed. He hadn't realized how versatile Bola's talent was. Her words flowed effortlessly, painting vivid pictures with each line. Femi, inspired by Bola's boldness, started experimenting with new musical styles, blending traditional African beats with contemporary sounds. He showed Bola a new song he was working on, a fusion of Afrobeat and R&B that made her want to dance. They played around with different rhythms, losing themselves in the music. It was in these moments that they felt most alive, free from the expectations that weighed them down. Their collaboration evolved, becoming a powerful expression of who they were, a poet and a singer, bound by their love of art and the unspoken understanding of each other's pain. Just when things seemed to be looking up, life threw Bola and Femi a curveball. Bola's grades began to slip, a consequence of her divided focus. Her parents were furious, accusing her of wasting her potential. They confiscated her notebooks, hoping it would force her to concentrate on her studies. Bola was devastated, feeling as though a part of her had been ripped away. She stopped showing up to rehearsals, too ashamed to tell Femi what had happened. Femi, too, was struggling. His father's health had deteriorated, and the family's financial situation worsened. The stress took its toll, and Femi found it harder to find the joy in music. He missed Bola's presence, her words that had always seemed to soothe his troubled mind. But he respected her space, hoping she would come back when she was ready. They were both falling apart, each dealing with their own battles in silence, and it felt like the dreams they had worked so hard for were slipping away. Bola's absence weighed heavily on Femi, and he realized how much her presence had come to mean to him. One day, he decided he couldn't just sit back and do nothing. He showed up at Bola's house, surprising her as she sat in her room, staring blankly at her schoolbooks. "I miss you," he said simply, holding out her notebook that he had managed to retrieve from her parents. Bola's eyes welled up with tears, and she hugged the book tightly, feeling a spark of hope reignite inside her. They spent the afternoon talking, sharing their fears and frustrations. Bola opened up about her parents' disapproval, and Femi spoke of his family's struggles. In that moment, they realized that no matter how difficult things got, they couldn't give up on what made them feel alive. They decided to start small, writing and rehearsing in secret, away from the prying eyes of their families. Slowly, they began to pick up the pieces, determined not to let the world tear them apart. Bola and Femi knew they couldn't continue as they had been, so they devised a new plan. They would work on their art in secret, finding time between school and family obligations. Bola suggested that they start performing at local spots, small gigs that wouldn't draw too much attention but would allow them to share their work. Femi loved the idea. It was a chance to test their material in front of a new audience and keep their passion alive. They began researching open mic nights and small events around the city. Bola's anxiety about performing was still there, but with Femi by her side, she felt braver. Femi's excitement was infectious, and he pushed her to step out of her comfort zone. Their first performance outside of school was at a small cafe, where they were met with a warm reception. It wasn't much, but it was enough to remind them why they had started this journey in the first place. Together, they were unstoppable. As they continued to perform, Bola and Femi's confidence grew. Bola's poetry took on new life when combined with Femi's music, and the audience could feel the passion behind every word and note. They were invited to perform at a youth event, where they met other young artists who shared their struggles and dreams. It was empowering to be surrounded by people who understood their journey, and Bola began to see her words as a gift rather than a burden. Femi, too, found solace in their performances. Each time he sang, it was like a weight was lifted off his shoulders. The music, once a source of stress, had become a refuge again, thanks to Bola's unwavering support. They were creating something bigger than themselves, a voice for the voiceless, a beacon of hope for anyone who had ever felt lost. Through their art, they were beginning to heal, finding strength in each other's company. Despite their growing success, tensions at home continued to mount. Bola's parents remained skeptical, convinced that her poetry was nothing more than a distraction. They pressured her to focus on preparing for university entrance exams, dismissing her artistic pursuits as a waste of time. Bola felt torn, the weight of her parents' expectations crushing her spirit. She confided in Femi, who understood all too well the burden of family pressure. His own father had become increasingly vocal about his disappointment, urging Femi to abandon music in favor of a real career. Femi's mother, however, had started to soften. She had seen how happy Femi was when he performed, and she secretly attended one of his gigs. Watching her son pour his heart into his music, she realized that this was more than just a hobby, it was his lifeline. She didn't fully understand it, but she couldn't deny the passion in his voice. It was a small victory, but one that gave Femi the courage to keep going. He and Bola promised each other that no matter what their families said, they wouldn't give up on their dreams. One day, Bola stumbled upon an advertisement for a national talent competition. The grand prize included a cash award, recording opportunities, and a chance to perform on a big stage. Bola immediately thought of Femi, knowing how much this could mean for him. They could use the prize money to help his family and take their art to the next level. When she showed Femi the flyer, his eyes lit up, but there was a flicker of doubt. The competition would be fierce, and there was no guarantee they would even make it past the auditions. Bola, however, was determined. She convinced Femi that they had nothing to lose. "We've been through worse," she said, her voice firm. "We can do this." They spent the next few weeks refining their act, perfecting every note and line. They knew this was their shot at something bigger, and they were willing to give it everything they had. The thought of performing on a national stage was both exhilarating and terrifying, but they were ready to take the leap together. The day of the auditions was nerve-wracking. Bola and Femi waited in a long line of hopeful contestants, each one vying for their chance to shine. Bola's hands shook as she clutched her notebook, and Femi could feel his heart pounding in his chest. They had never faced an audience this big before, and the stakes felt higher than ever. When their turn finally came, they stepped onto the stage, the bright lights blinding them momentarily. Femi began to play, and Bola followed with her poetry, her voice clear and strong despite her nerves. The judges watched intently, and for a moment, it felt like the world had stopped. When they finished, there was a brief silence before the room erupted in applause. Bola and Femi looked at each other, grinning with relief. They had done it, they had made it through the first round. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. As they left the stage, they knew this was only the beginning of their journey. Making it through the first round of the competition was exhilarating, but it also brought new challenges. They had to prepare for the next stage, which required a more polished and dynamic performance. Bola and Femi spent countless hours rehearsing, fine-tuning every detail. The pressure was intense, and there were moments when they clashed over creative differences. Bola's meticulous approach sometimes frustrated Femi, who preferred to let the music flow naturally. But they always found a way to compromise, driven by their shared vision. Outside of rehearsals, the realities of their personal lives continued to weigh on them. Bola's parents had found out about the competition and were less than pleased. They warned her that if she didn't pass her exams, there would be consequences. Femi's father, meanwhile, remained skeptical of his son's chances, dismissing the competition as a distraction from his studies. Despite the setbacks, Bola and Femi remained resolute. They had come too far to turn back now. The second round of the competition was even more intense than the first. The other contestants were incredibly talented, each bringing their unique flair to the stage. Bola and Femi watched, feeling the weight of the competition settle on their shoulders. When their turn came, they took a deep breath and stepped onto the stage, determined to give it their all. Femi's fingers danced over the guitar strings, and Bola's voice flowed, each word carrying the weight of their shared journey. The judges were captivated by their performance, and when they finished, the applause was thunderous. Bola and Femi had made it to the next round, securing their place among the top contestants. It was a moment of pure elation, a validation of all the hard work they had put in. But as they celebrated, they knew that the hardest part was yet to come. They would need to dig deeper, push harder, and continue to fight for their dreams. Together, they were unstoppable, and they were ready to face whatever came next. With each round of the competition, the stakes grew higher, and so did the pressures on Bola and Femi. Their families were still skeptical, and the strain began to take its toll on their friendship. Small disagreements over their performances sometimes escalated into heated arguments. Bola's perfectionism clashed with Femi's improvisational style, and there were times when they both felt like giving up. But every time they hit a breaking point, they reminded each other of why they started in the first place. Femi's music and Bola's poetry were more than just hobbies, they were lifelines that had pulled them out of darkness. They knew they were stronger together than apart. With renewed determination, they pushed through the growing pains, finding new ways to blend their talents. Each performance became a testament to their resilience, and they started to attract a following. People were moved by their story, and it gave them the encouragement they needed to keep going. Just when things seemed to be going smoothly, Bola received some devastating news. Her grades had dropped significantly, putting her at risk of failing her exams. Her parents were livid, blaming her involvement in the competition for her academic decline. They threatened to pull her out of the competition altogether, insisting that she focus on her studies. Bola was heartbroken. She felt trapped, torn between her passion and her responsibilities. She confided in Femi, who was equally devastated. He knew how much the competition meant to her, and he didn't want to see her give up. Together, they came up with a plan. They would reduce their rehearsal time, allowing Bola to catch up on her studies while still preparing for the next round. Femi even helped her with her schoolwork, staying up late to quiz her on subjects she struggled with. It wasn't easy, but they were determined to make it work. Bola's grades slowly improved, and she felt a renewed sense of hope. She wasn't going to let anything stop her, not now, when they were so close to their dream. After their performance in the semi-finals, Bola and Femi began to attract media attention. Local newspapers and radio stations wanted to interview them, fascinated by their unique blend of poetry and music. It was overwhelming but also thrilling to see their hard work recognized on such a large scale. They were invited to perform at a charity event, where they met other artists and influencers who offered them guidance and support. Bola's parents, who had initially been against her involvement in the competition, began to see things differently. They still had reservations, but they couldn't ignore the pride they felt watching their daughter's success. Femi's family, too, started to soften. His mother beamed with pride each time she saw him on TV or heard his voice on the radio. For the first time, it felt like their dreams were within reach. But with the finals just around the corner, Bola and Femi knew they couldn't afford to get complacent. They had to keep pushing, keep fighting, and most importantly, keep believing in each other. As the finals loomed closer, the stress of the competition began to take its toll on Bola and Femi's friendship. Small misunderstandings turned into big arguments, and their once seamless collaboration became strained. Femi felt that Bola was holding back, afraid to take risks, while Bola accused Femi of being too reckless, jeopardizing their chances with his improvisations. They were both exhausted, and the pressure was getting to them. After one particularly heated argument, they decided to take a break from each other, each needing space to clear their heads. The time apart was painful. Bola missed Femi's unwavering support, and Femi longed for Bola's coming presence. They realized that their friendship was more important than the competition, and that they couldn't let petty differences tear them apart. After a few days, Femi showed up at Bola's doorstep, guitar in hand. He played a soft tune, and Bola, smiling through her tears, joined him with a verse. It was their way of apologizing, a silent promise to stand by each other no matter what. After their reconciliation, Bola and Femi were more determined than ever. They realized that their strength came from their bond, and that together, they could overcome any obstacle. They spent hours refining their final performance, drawing from the highs and lows of their journey. Bola wrote a new poem, one that captured the essence of their friendship and the healing power of art. Femi composed a melody that complemented her words perfectly, and for the first time in weeks, they felt like they were back on track. The days leading up to the finals were a blur of rehearsals, interviews, and media appearances. Bola and Femi were nervous, but they were also excited. They knew they had something special, something that went beyond the competition. Win or lose, they were proud of what they had created together. The night before the finals, they made a promise to give it their all, to leave everything on the stage, and to never forget the journey that had brought them here. The night of the finals was electric. The auditorium was filled with spectators, cameras, and judges, all waiting to see the top contestants perform. Bola and Femi were the last act of the night, and as they waited backstage, they could hear the thunderous applause for the other performers. Bola's heart pounded, and she felt a wave of doubt wash over her. But Femi squeezed her hand, his eyes full of confidence. "We've got this," he whispered, and Bola nodded, taking a deep breath. When they stepped onto the stage, the audience fell silent. Femi started playing, and Bola began to speak, her voice steady and full of emotion. Their performance was raw, honest, and deeply personal. It was a story of pain, hope, and the power of art to heal. As they reached the final verse, Femi's voice cracked with emotion, and Bola's eyes filled with tears. The audience was moved, and when they finished, the applause was deafening. Bola and Femi hugged, overwhelmed by the response. They had given it their all, and in that moment, they felt like they had already won. The judges took what felt like an eternity to deliberate, and Bola and Femi waited anxiously backstage. They had poured their hearts into their final performance, and now all they could do was hope. When the host finally called their names, they stepped onto the stage, holding hands. The tension in the room was palpable as the judges announced the results. Bola's heart sank when they didn't take first place, but when their names were called for second place, the applause was just as loud. It wasn't the grand prize, but it was still a huge accomplishment. They had come so far, and the recognition they received was beyond anything they had imagined. The judges praised their originality and the emotional depth of their performance, encouraging them to continue pursuing their art. Bola and Femi left the stage with their heads held high, knowing that they had made their mark. It was a bittersweet victory, but one that filled them with pride and hope for the future. Though they didn't win first place, the exposure from the competition opened doors that Bola and Femi had never dreamed of. They were approached by local producers who wanted to collaborate, and invitations to perform at various events started pouring in. Bola's poetry gained a following, and Femi's music was being played on local radio stations. They were no longer just two students chasing a dream, they were becoming recognized artists in their own right. Bola's parents, who had once dismissed her passion, began to see the value in her art. They were proud of her accomplishments, and for the first time, they encouraged her to keep writing. Femi's family, too, was finally supportive, and his father, who had always been skeptical, expressed his pride in his son's perseverance. Bola and Femi continued to work together, their friendship stronger than ever. They knew the road ahead would still be challenging, but they were ready to face it, side by side. Months after the competition, Bola and Femi sat by the river, reflecting on how far they had come. They had faced countless obstacles, but through it all, they had found something precious, each other. Their friendship had grown into something deeper, built on trust, respect, and a shared love of art. They had discovered that true fulfillment didn't come from winning a competition or gaining recognition, but from staying true to themselves and their passions. Bola's depression hadn't disappeared, but she had learned to manage it with the support of Femi and her writing. Femi, too, had found a renewed sense of purpose in his music, using it as a tool to express his emotions and connect with others. Together, they continued to create, inspire, and heal. They were no longer lost in the lyrics, they had found their way, and they were determined to keep moving forward, one verse at a time.